In the hills of Guadalajara, where the night wind carries whispers of prayers left unfinished, stands the crumbling remains of what was once the convent of Santo Domingo, 70 years before the terrible events that would shake Nuevo León. Here, 30 Dominican nuns endured the same indescribable horror that would later repeat itself like a curse, traveling from convent to convent. It was the year 1680, and what began as mystical visions during morning prayers ended in a way so disturbing that the surviving witnesses lost their sanity merely by remembering it. No chronicler of the time dared to fully record what happened within those volcanic stone walls. But the fragments that survive speak of a transformation so unnatural it defies all human understanding. The few records that exist were sealed by the Holy Inquisition, marked with the warning, "Let no one read this unless prepared to lose faith in all that is sacred." Today, after more than 3 centuries of silence, we will reveal what truly happened in that cursed place, and why its story is terrifyingly connected to the events that would unfold decades later in the mountains of Nuevo León. The convent of Santo Domingo was founded in 1650 on the outskirts of Guadalajara, built over the ruins of an Aztec temple destroyed by conquistadors a century earlier. It was an imposing structure of black volcanic stone, with towers rising like accusing fingers toward the heavens and narrow windows that looked like watchful eyes, forever observing anyone who dared to approach. 30 Dominican nuns lived there under the leadership of Mother Beatrice of the Immaculate Conception, a 40-year-old woman whose spiritual beauty was known throughout New Galicia. She had renounced a life of privilege in Mexico City, the capital of the Viceroyalty, to dedicate herself completely to divine contemplation and the education of indigenous girls. The convent followed the strict rules of the Dominican order, waking at 4 a.m. for matins, 8 hours of daily silent prayer, manual work in the gardens where they cultivated medicinal herbs, and fasting every Friday. It was a life of constant sacrifice, which the sisters embraced joyfully, believing that every deprivation drew them closer to God's presence. For 30 years, the convent had been a model of Christian devotion. The people of Guadalajara awoke each morning to the sound of its bells calling for dawn prayer, and many marked their days by the steady rhythm of the convent's religious services. That sound brought peace and hope to the region until the spring of 1680, when everything began to change. Sister Maria del Carmen, an 18-year-old novice who had been in the convent for barely 6 months, was the first to experience what they called mystical visions. On the morning of March 15th, during prayer in the main chapel, she began to hear a male voice speaking to her in Latin. It promised to reveal the deepest mysteries of the Christian faith. The voice was melodic, hypnotic, and its whispered words carried a wisdom no human theologian could ever teach. Day after day, the visions grew stronger. The entity that spoke to Sister Maria del Carmen showed her images of saints in ecstasy, of martyrs whose suffering transformed into divine joy, and of secret rituals that, according to the voice, had been practiced by the earliest Christians, but were later forgotten by the modern church. Soon, other nuns began to experience similar phenomena. Sister Esperanza de Los Angeles started levitating during night prayers. Sister Catalina de la Cruz developed stigmata that bled every Friday, but instead of pain, she was overcome with such bliss that tears of joy ran down her face. One after another, all 30 nuns were touched by what they believed to be extraordinary divine manifestations. Mother Beatrice carefully documented these events in a secret diary, writing, "The Lord has chosen us to receive special graces that will prepare our souls for a sacred mission. These visions reveal truths that transcend the ordinary teachings of the Church. On September 12, 1680, exactly 70 years before the events that would later shake Nuevo León, began what the few surviving witnesses described as 3 days when heaven turned into hell. It started during morning mass. Father Santiago de Molina, chaplain of the convent, noticed that all 30 nuns had adopted a strange posture during consecration. Instead of kneeling with bowed heads, as was custom, they stood with arms outstretched in the shape of a cross, eyes wide open and fixed upon the altar. Father Molina tried to continue the ceremony, but when he raised the consecrated host, the nuns began to chant in unison in a language he did not recognize. It was not Latin, nor Nahuatl, nor any language known to man. It was something older, more primal, something that seemed to rise from the very depths of the earth itself. The chanting grew louder and louder, forming an impossible harmony that made the stained glass windows of the chapel tremble and crack. Father Molina later described the sound not only as something heard, but as something felt, as if the words themselves were carving directly into the bones of anyone who listened. For 3 full hours, the nuns maintained their chant while their bodies remained completely motionless. When the chaplain tried to touch them, he discovered something terrifying. He could not. His hands passed straight through their bodies, as though they were made of smoke, though to the eye they remained entirely solid. At noon, the chanting suddenly stopped. The nuns lowered their arms, looked at one another in confusion, and asked Father Molina why he was crying. None of them remembered singing. None remembered even the final moments of the Mass. That night, the people of Guadalajara reported strange phenomena. Blue lights danced above the convent towers from midnight until dawn, accompanied by a sound described as the crying of 1,000 lost children. Several witnesses swore they saw human figures walking through the air around the building, as if climbing invisible steps toward the heavens. The second day was worse. During evening prayer, the nuns began experiencing what seemed to be simultaneous mystical ecstasies. They collapsed to the ground, convulsing, their faces glowing with expressions of supernatural joy. But what was happening to their bodies was even more disturbing. Their bodies began to change. Sister Maria del Carmen, the first to have visions, developed marks across her skin, perfectly shaped geometric symbols. They were not wounds. The marks seemed to be carved from within, as though something inside her was writing on her flesh. Sister Esperanza began to radiate a golden glow, visible even in broad daylight. Other nuns experienced elongations in their fingers, shifts in the color of their eyes, or voices capable of reaching notes impossible for the human throat. Terrified, Father Molina sent an urgent message to the Bishop of Guadalajara. "Your Excellency, what is happening here goes beyond my understanding. The sisters claim to be experiencing mystical union with the divine, but the changes in their bodies suggest something I dare not name without blasphemy." The reply came on the 3rd day. The bishop dispatched Friar Tomas de Zumarraga, the same inquisitor who, decades later, would investigate similar events in other convents of the region. But when Friar Tomas arrived at Santo Domingo on the afternoon of September 14th, he encountered something no inquisitorial investigation had ever prepared him to face. Friar Tomas de Zumarraga was known throughout New Spain for his ability to expose fraudulent miracles and falsified supernatural claims. He had investigated over 50 supposed cases, and in every one had found rational explanations: collective hysteria, mental illness, or simple deceit. So when he arrived at the convent that September afternoon, he expected to find yet another hoax, one he could dismiss within hours. What he found would scar him for the rest of his life. The 30 nuns were gathered in the central cloister, sitting in a perfect circle around the well of holy water. But they were not seated on the ground. They were floating, about a meter in the air, in the lotus position, eyes closed, expressions of absolute serenity. When Friar Tomas tried to approach, he discovered an invisible barrier blocking him. Reaching toward the circle, his fingers pressed against something that felt like solid glass, though nothing could be seen. "Sisters," he cried out, "can you hear me?" All of them opened their eyes at the same time, but they were no longer the eyes of human women. Instead of irises and pupils, their eyes shone entirely golden, like tiny suns radiating their own light. "Friar Tomas," they spoke in unison, their 30 voices fused into one harmonious chord. "We have been waiting for you. Come and witness the truth that will transform your understanding of the divine." The Inquisitor tried to step back, but found that he could not. His feet were fixed to the ground, as if rooted in place. The floating nuns began to chant again, in the same unknown language as before. But this time, the sound had a visible, physical effect. The air around them rippled like water, distorting reality itself and making it nearly impossible to focus his vision. And then the true horror began to reveal itself. As the nuns chanted, Friar Tomas began to see images projected directly into his mind. They were not mystical visions. They were memories. Memories that were not his own. He saw the exact moment when each nun had first been contacted by the entity. He saw the secret nocturnal rituals they had been performing in silence. And then he saw the terrifying truth of what was really happening. The being that had been communicating with the nuns was not divine. It was something far older, something that had slumbered beneath the Aztec temple on which the convent had been built. The blood rituals of the ancient worshippers had once served to keep it asleep. But when the temple was destroyed and the land consecrated as Christian ground, the seals weakened. The pure devotion of the nuns, their unshakable faith and constant prayers, had created exactly the kind of spiritual energy the entity fed upon. For 30 years, it had been growing in strength, preparing for the moment when it could fully manifest. The transformations the nuns experienced were not divine blessings. They were the process by which the entity was reshaping them into vessels for its own consciousness. Every physical change, every supernatural power, was a stage in their metamorphosis, from human beings into fragments of something utterly inhuman. "Do you understand now, Friar Tomas?" the floating nuns asked in their collective voice. "Faith and devotion are but different names for the same energy, an energy that nourishes both the sacred and the profane. We have uncovered the truth the Church has hidden for centuries. There is no true difference between heaven and what you call hell." The Inquisitor desperately tried to recite the prayers of exorcism. But something horrifying happened. The Latin words that left his lips twisted into the same unknown language the nuns were chanting. It was as if the entity's presence corrupted even his attempts to invoke divine protection. "Do not resist what is inevitable," the voices continued. "Soon, this pattern will repeat in other convents of the region. In 70 years, another community of nuns in the mountains of Nuevo León will undergo the same glorious transformation, and others will follow. We are merely the beginning of something far greater." At last, Friar Tomas managed to break free from the paralysis that held him in place, but not to escape. In a moment of desperate clarity, he realized what he had to do. For the next 3 days, Friar Tomas remained inside the convent, not as an investigator, but as a powerless witness to a transformation beyond all description. The nuns had stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped performing any human bodily function. They remained suspended in their circle, feeding solely on the energy the entity provided. With each passing hour, they became less human. Their bodies began to turn translucent, as if made of golden crystal filled with liquid light. Their voices fused into one collective consciousness that spoke with the knowledge of millennia. The Inquisitor documented everything in a trembling hand. I have witnessed the most terrible truth. There exists a force that feeds on pure faith, turning devotion into fuel for a transformation that transcends all human notions of good and evil. These women sincerely believe they are ascending to a higher divine plane, but in truth, they are being consumed by something that existed long before the first humans ever spoke the name of God. On the night of September 17th, the transformation reached its climax. The 30 nuns merged into a single luminous entity, a colossal feminine figure of impossible proportions, with 30 pairs of arms and 30 smiling faces glowing with supernatural beatitude. Now we are one, declared the figure, its voice carrying the echoes of all the individual nuns. We have transcended the limitations of mortal flesh to become a fragment of primordial consciousness. And you, Friar, shall be our witness. The fused entity extended one of its many arms toward the Inquisitor. When it touched him, Friar Tomas was struck with a torrent of knowledge so vast it nearly shattered his sanity. He saw the future. He saw the events that would unfold in other convents over the coming centuries. He saw the pattern that would repeat, again and again, until the entity had gathered enough power to fully manifest in the physical world. In the mountains of Nuevo León, the entity whispered, its voice coming from every direction at once, other nuns shall follow our path. And when the time is right, someone will uncover the complete truth buried within the documents that a future investigator will hide out of fear. Until then, we shall remain here, keeping alive the flame that will fuel the final awakening. Friar Tomas understood that he was witnessing only a single step in a plan spanning centuries. The entity was not creating these transformations at random. It was systematically building a network of power, one that would one day allow it to manifest not just in one place, but in many, all at once. Friar Tomas finally realized the terrible truth. He had not been chosen to stop what was happening, but to ensure it continued. The entity needed the information to survive across generations, yet preserved in fragments, like pieces of a puzzle, so that each new investigator would uncover only enough to unknowingly fuel the plan. Over the following weeks, Friar Tomas worked feverishly on 2 versions of his report. The official version, which he sent to the Holy Office, described the events as a case of demonic possession, successfully exorcised through prayer and rituals of purification. According to this account, the 30 nuns had died during the process, and their bodies had been cleansed by holy fire. But there was also a secret version, written in a coded language decipherable only by specially trained inquisitors. It contained the complete truth, not only what he had witnessed, but also the visions the entity had shown him, visions of events yet to come. It was a temporal map of horrors stretching across centuries. While Friar Tomas wrote, the fused entity lingered within the convent. No longer visible as a human-shaped figure, it had dispersed into a presence that saturated every stone, every wooden beam, every drop of holy water. The entire convent had become a living organism, pulsing with ancestral consciousness. One night, As the Inquisitor finished his writing, the presence manifested one last time, a whispering voice that seemed to come from the very walls. "Friar Tomas, you have fulfilled your purpose. Now you must leave and never return. But before you go, you must bury a copy of your true report in a place where it will be found when the time is right." The entity then revealed a mental image, a chamber deep beneath the mountains of Nuevo León, a place that did not yet exist, but would be unearthed decades later by a man named Ignacio Mendoza. Friar Tomas was to travel there and hide his documentation in such a way that it would resurface precisely when needed. "Why help preserve information that could be used against you?" the Inquisitor demanded. "Because resistance is part of the pattern," the presence replied. "Every attempt to stop our manifestation only strengthens it. The struggle between those who try to contain us and our inevitable expansion creates exactly the kind of energy we require to grow. Future investigators will believe they fight us, when in truth, they will be completing the design we began here." Friar Tomas understood the diabolical trap. To resist the entity was to feed it, but to ignore it was to allow it to expand unopposed. It was a game in which the entity always won. With his heart crushed by the weight of complicity, the Inquisitor packed his documents and abandoned the convent of Santo Domingo at dawn in October of 1680. As he left, he heard one last time the fused voices of the 30 nuns, singing in that unknown tongue which he now understood. It was the purest form of communication with forces that existed long before human time. On October 15, 1680, Friar Tomas arrived at a remote valley in the mountains of Nuevo León, a place toward which he had felt an inexplicable pull throughout his journey. The valley radiated the same ancestral energy he had experienced in Guadalajara, but here it was subtler, as if lying in deep slumber. Following instructions the entity had implanted in his mind, he began to dig an underground chamber at a precise spot in the valley. The work took him days, but his hands moved as though guided by an invisible force, shaping a cavity designed not by him, but by something greater, perfectly suited to preserve documents for centuries. Before sealing his writings in iron chests, Friar Tomas added one final note to his secret report. Asterisk, to whoever discovers this file, what I experienced in Guadalajara will repeat here, in this very valley. A religious community will one day be established on this ground, and when the time comes, the same entity that transformed the Dominican sisters will seek new vessels for its consciousness. The documents enclosed with this warning contain the knowledge necessary to understand what you will face, but they also contain the trap. Any attempt to use this knowledge will only feed the entity's power. The dilemma is insoluble, and so I must hide it until someone wiser than myself discovers a third path that I cannot see. Asterisk. He sealed the chamber and built stone markers above it, crafted to look natural but positioned carefully so that, one day, they would guide future investigators to the exact location. Then he returned to Guadalajara to complete his official report. The version he sent to the Holy Office was accepted without question, a successful exorcism that had purified a site contaminated by demonic forces. The convent of Santo Domingo was officially closed and declared consecrated ground, where no religious structure should ever again be built. But Friar Tomas knew the truth. The entity had not been exorcised. It had merely dispersed into the site, waiting patiently for the right moment to return. And when that moment came, all the knowledge necessary to fight, it would be available, unaware that using it would be exactly what the entity needed to complete its final transformation. The Inquisitor lived the rest of his life under the crushing weight of knowing he had been used as a pawn in a game spanning centuries. He died in 1715, taking to the grave secrets that could only be fully understood by those destined to find them at the appointed time. In the mountains of Nuevo León, the sealed chamber waited in silence for decades. Then, in 1720, exactly above the hidden vault, a convent dedicated to St. Clare of Assisi was founded, fulfilling the first part of the prophecy Friar Tomás had recorded with terror. The events at the convent of Santo Domingo in Guadalajara thus became the first link in a chain that would extend for centuries. The entity had succeeded in establishing its first permanent anchor in the physical world, disguising its victory as a defeat through Friar Tomás's official report. In the decades that followed, the site of the abandoned convent became a place of secret pilgrimage for those seeking intense, mystical experiences. Though access was officially forbidden, many claimed to have witnessed visions, miraculous healings, and encounters with mysterious female figures dressed in white who promised profound spiritual revelations. The local church interpreted these events as signs that the martyred nuns were interceding from heaven for the faithful, without realizing that every mystical experience was feeding the scattered presence that lingered within the ruins. With each new wave of devotion, the entity grew stronger, preparing for its next manifestation. And then, in 1750, exactly 70 years after the Guadalajara events, the pattern repeated at the convent of Santa Clara in Nuevo León, just as the entity had foretold. Decades later, in 1823, Ignacio Mendoza uncovered the chamber sealed by Friar Tomás. Inside, he found exactly the information he needed to solve the mystery, never realizing he was following a script written centuries earlier. Every investigation, every attempted exorcism, every ritual designed to contain the entity had already been anticipated and woven into its master plan. Human resistance was not an obstacle to its goals. It was the fuel it required to manifest fully. The site of the convent of Santo Domingo remains to this day a place of intense spiritual energy, though few understand the true nature of what dwells there. Locals avoid the area after nightfall, and church authorities still forbid the construction of any religious structure on the ground. Yet on certain nights, when the moon is at its darkest, witnesses claim to see golden lights dancing above the ruins, accompanied by chanting in a language no one recognizes, though all who hear it feel it resonate in their bones, older than human memory itself. The documents of Friar Tomás still wait in the Vatican's most secret archives, classified as testimonies of inexplicable events, with access strictly restricted. Only a handful of specialized investigators have ever read the full report, and most of them, after finishing it, requested transfers to other fields of study, unwilling to continue confronting its implications. The Inquisitor's final warning echoes across the centuries. Let whoever reads this understand that knowledge itself can be a trap. To seek the truth about certain mysteries may be the first step toward fulfilling the very purposes one hopes to thwart. This story teaches us that some horrors transcend human categories of good and evil, using even our noblest efforts to fight them as stepping stones for their own realization. It also reminds us that true wisdom sometimes lies in recognizing when the pursuit of knowledge might carry us beyond the limits of what the human mind can endure without corruption. And now the question is passed on to us. What do you think of Friar Tomás's dilemma? Did he do the right thing by preserving information he knew would one day be turned against humanity? Or should he have destroyed every trace, erasing the knowledge completely? Leave your theory in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this tale and want more historical horrors like it, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell. Remember, the first 2,000 subscribers are entered into our giveaway for an all-expenses-paid trip to Paris, where you'll explore the hidden secrets of Notre Dame that no tourist has ever seen. Will you be one of the fortunate few?